At 48 years old, Ethan Blackwood had everything money could buy and nothing his heart truly wanted. As the CEO of a billion-dollar company, he was respected, feared, and admired across the business world. His name appeared on magazine covers. Investors trusted him. Competitors dreaded him. But there was one thing people never understood. Why had he never married? Rumors followed him everywhere. Some said he had a secret lover. Others believed he had suffered a devastating heartbreak years ago. The truth was much simpler. Ethan avoided women because he had spent most of his life watching relationships fail. His parents had divorced when he was young. His father had cheated. His mother had never recovered from the betrayal. From that moment on, Ethan convinced himself that love was dangerous. It distracted people. It weakened them. And he refused to become weak, so he buried himself in work, year after year, decade after decade, until loneliness became a routine he no longer questioned. Then, one rainy evening changed everything. The storm hit unexpectedly as Ethan left a board meeting downtown. Traffic was terrible. His driver suggested waiting. But Ethan preferred walking the few blocks to his apartment. Halfway there, he noticed a small crowd gathering near a bus stop. People stood around filming with their phones. Nobody moved. Nobody helped. Curious, Ethan stepped closer. A young woman was kneeling on the wet pavement beside an elderly homeless man. The old man was shivering violently. His clothes were soaked. His lips had turned blue. Without hesitation, the woman removed her own coat and wrapped it around him. Then she handed him a warm coffee she had clearly purchased for herself. "You need this more than I do," she said gently. The old man's eyes filled with tears. Ethan froze. He wasn't surprised by the homeless man. He wasn't surprised by the rain. He was surprised by her because genuine kindness had become rare in his world, especially kindness with no audience. No reward, no expectation. The crowd soon lost interest and disappeared. But the woman stayed. She called emergency services. She waited beside the old man until help arrived. Only then did she leave. Ethan found himself watching her walk away. For reasons he couldn't explain, he followed. Not in a creepy way. Simply curious. She entered a modest neighborhood cafe. Through the window, Ethan saw her counting coins before ordering the cheapest item on the menu. That surprised him even more. She wasn't wealthy. Yet, she had given away what little she had. The next morning, Ethan couldn't stop thinking about her. For the first time in years, he arrived late to work. His assistant immediately noticed. "Everything okay, sir?" "No," Ethan admitted, and that answer shocked even him. Over the next week, he returned to the cafe several times. Eventually, he learned her name, Sophie Carter. She worked at a local community center, helping struggling families. The salary was modest. The hours were long. Yet everyone she met seemed to adore her. Children ran toward her. Elderly people greeted her warmly. Even strangers smiled when they saw her. It was as if she carried sunlight wherever she went. One afternoon, Ethan finally introduced himself. To his surprise, Sophie had no idea who he was. She didn't recognize his name. She didn't care about his wealth. She treated him exactly like everyone else. That fascinated him. Their conversations became regular. Coffee turned into lunches. Lunches became evening walks. For the first time in decades, Ethan laughed without forcing it. For the first time in decades, he looked forward to tomorrow. Then came the night that changed everything. A charity fundraiser organized by Sophie's community center was struggling. Donations were low. Families depended on the event's success. Sophie worked tirelessly for weeks. But the stress finally caught up with her. As the evening ended, she stepped outside for fresh air. Ethan followed. "You did amazing tonight," he told her. Tears suddenly filled her eyes. "I just wanted to help more people." "You already have." "No," she whispered. "Sometimes it feels like it's never enough." Before Ethan could respond, Sophie leaned forward. Overcome with emotion and gratitude for his support, she kissed his cheek. It lasted only a second. A simple gesture, nothing more. Yet the moment her lips touched his skin, something shattered inside him. Not fear, not resistance. The walls he had spent 30 years building. For decades. Ethan believed love made people weak. But standing there beneath the city lights, he realized the opposite. Love gave people courage. It gave them purpose. It inspired kindness. It transformed ordinary moments into unforgettable memories. And suddenly he understood why people risked heartbreak, because some connections were worth everything. Sophie pulled back immediately, embarrassed. "Oh my gosh, I'm sorry." But Ethan couldn't speak. His heart was racing like a teenager's. The powerful CEO who could negotiate billion-dollar deals had completely lost the ability to form a sentence. For the first time in 48 years, he was hopelessly, undeniably in love. Weeks later, Ethan quietly funded the community center's expansion. Not for publicity, not for recognition, but because Sophie had taught him something priceless. Success meant little if it wasn't used to help others. Together, they launched programs that fed families, supported children, and provided housing assistance for seniors. Thousands of lives improved, and every time Ethan saw someone receive help, he remembered that rainy evening. The evening a kind stranger gave away her coat. The evening a lonely CEO discovered what truly mattered. The evening a single kiss changed the course of his life forever. For weeks after that kiss, Ethan Blackwood found himself living in a world that felt completely different. Nothing around him had changed. His company remained one of the most successful in the country. His schedule was still packed with meetings. His phone still rang nonstop. Yet everything felt new, because every morning his first thought was Sophie. And every night, his last thought was Sophie. The realization terrified him. At 48 years old, Ethan knew how to manage crises, negotiate billion-dollar contracts, and lead thousands of employees. But he had absolutely no idea how to handle being in love. One afternoon, he sat across from Sophie at their favorite cafe. She was laughing about a child from the community center who had accidentally painted a dog bright blue. Ethan couldn't stop smiling. "What?" Sophie asked. "Nothing." "No, tell me." He shook his head. "I was just thinking." "About business?" "No." "Then it must be serious." Ethan looked at her, very serious. But he wasn't ready to confess his feelings. Not yet. Meanwhile, Sophie remained completely unaware. To her, Ethan was a wonderful friend, a generous man, a person who listened when others ignored her. She never imagined the powerful CEO sitting across from her was slowly falling deeper in love every day. Then fate decided to complicate everything. One evening, Sophie received a phone call. Her younger brother, Daniel, had been involved in a serious car accident. Within minutes, she rushed to the hospital. When Ethan heard the news, he immediately canceled every meeting and drove there himself. He found Sophie sitting alone in a waiting room. Her hands trembled. Her eyes were red from crying. The confident woman who spent her life helping others suddenly looked fragile. Without saying a word, Ethan sat beside her. For several minutes, neither spoke. Then Sophie quietly leaned against his shoulder, and Ethan stayed there all night. When doctors finally emerged with good news, Sophie burst into tears of relief. Her brother would recover. The danger had passed. Overwhelmed with emotion, she hugged Ethan tightly. "You didn't have to stay," she whispered. "Yes, I did." Their eyes met for a brief moment. Neither looked away. Something shifted between them, something undeniable. But before either could say anything, Daniel's doctor interrupted. The moment disappeared. Or so they thought. Over the following months, Ethan became even more involved with the community center. Employees noticed changes in him. The once cold CEO now smiled more often. He listened more carefully. He even established new scholarship programs for disadvantaged students. The board of directors was stunned. One executive finally asked him, "What happened to you?" Ethan simply replied, "I met someone who reminded me what success is actually for." Word eventually reached the media. Articles praised Ethan's growing charitable efforts. Reporters wanted interviews, photographers wanted exclusive stories. But Ethan refused every request. He didn't want attention. He wanted impact. Meanwhile, Sophie faced challenges of her own. Funding remained difficult. Demand for services continued growing. And, despite Ethan's support, she often worried about the future. One rainy evening, after a particularly exhausting day, she sat alone in the community center. The lights were off. The building was quiet. Suddenly, the door opened. Ethan walked in carrying 2 cups of coffee. "I thought you might still be here." Sophie smiled tiredly. "You know me too well." They sat together in silence. The rain tapped gently against the windows. For a while, neither spoke. Then Sophie surprised him. "Can I ask you something?" "Anything. Why are you really helping us?" Ethan looked into his coffee. For years he had hidden from difficult questions. "But not anymore. Not with her." Finally, he answered honestly. "Because you changed me." Sophie's heart skipped. "What do you mean?" Ethan took a deep breath. The moment he had feared for months had finally arrived. "You showed me kindness when you didn't know who I was." He looked directly into her eyes. "You taught me that strength isn't about protecting yourself from people." Sophie's breath caught. "Ethan, it's about caring enough to let people matter." The room suddenly felt very small, very quiet, very important. For the first time, Sophie began seeing him differently. Not as a successful CEO, not as a generous donor, but as a man. A man whose heart had slowly opened because of her. And for the first time, she realized her own heart might be opening too. Neither knew it yet. But the biggest test of their relationship was about to begin. And it would force both of them to choose between fear and love. The weeks that followed felt like a dream neither Ethan nor Sophie wanted to wake from. After their conversation at the community center, something unspoken changed between them. Their friendship remained the same on the surface. They still shared coffee. They still walked through the city after work. They still laughed at the smallest things. But now every glance lasted a little longer. Every smile carried a hidden meaning. And every goodbye felt harder than the one before. For Ethan, the change was impossible to ignore. At 48 years old, he felt emotions he had never experienced in his youth. He wanted to protect Sophie, support her, make her happy. Most of all, he wanted to be part of her life, not for a season, not for a chapter. Forever. Yet one fear continued to haunt him. The age difference. Sophie was 32, 16 years younger than him. What if she eventually realized she deserved someone closer to her age? Someone less complicated. Someone who hadn't spent decades hiding behind boardrooms and business deals. The thought kept him awake at night. Unfortunately, fate seemed determined to make those fears worse. One morning, headlines exploded across social media. A major business magazine published an article about Ethan's growing charitable work. The story quickly went viral. Photographers followed him everywhere. News channels discussed his personal life. And before long, reporters discovered Sophie. Suddenly, cameras appeared outside the community center. Strangers posted comments online. Some praised their relationship. Others criticized it. Many assumed Sophie was only interested in Ethan's money. The accusations hurt, not because they were true, but because they were completely false. For the first time in her life, Sophie found herself being judged by people who didn't know her. One afternoon, she sat alone in her office reading hateful comments online. Gold digger, attention seeker, future trophy wife. Each word felt like a knife. Then her phone rang. It was Ethan. The moment she heard his voice, her composure broke. "I'm sorry," he said quietly. "You didn't do anything wrong. This is happening because of me." "No," Sophie replied. "It's happening because people love making assumptions." That evening, Ethan arrived at the community center. Without saying a word, he took her hand. "Come with me." "Where?" "You'll see." An hour later, they stood on a quiet hill overlooking the city. The skyline sparkled beneath the stars. No reporters, no cameras, no noise. Just peace. For several minutes, they watched the lights in silence. Then Ethan spoke. I spent most of my life worrying about what people thought. Sophie listened. I worried about my reputation, my image, my success. He turned toward her, and none of it made me happy. The sincerity in his eyes made her heart ache. You make me happy. The words hung in the air, Sybil, honest, powerful. Sophie's breath caught. For a moment, neither moved. Then Ethan smiled nervously, a sight so rare it almost made her laugh. That sounded better in my head. Sophie laughed through tears, and before fear could stop her, she stepped closer, much closer. You make me happy, too. The world seemed to stop. Every doubt, every fear, every obstacle. None of it mattered in that moment. Ethan gently brushed a strand of hair from her face. His hand trembled, not from uncertainty, but from emotion. The powerful CEO who could face hostile investors without blinking was nervous because of one woman. And Sophie found that incredibly beautiful. Slowly, she leaned forward. This time, the kiss wasn't accidental. It wasn't born from gratitude or emotion. It was a choice, a promise, a beginning. When they finally pulled apart, both were smiling. For the first time, their feelings were no longer hidden. But just as their happiness began to bloom, an unexpected challenge arrived. 2 days later, Ethan received devastating news. During a routine medical examination, doctors discovered a serious heart condition, one that required immediate treatment, one that carried significant risks. For the first time in decades, Ethan faced something money couldn't instantly fix: mortality. The possibility of losing everything, including Sophie. As he sat alone in the doctor's office listening to the diagnosis, only one thought filled his mind. Not fear for himself, not concern for his company, only her. Because after spending 48 years avoiding love, he had finally found it. And now he risked losing it before their story had truly begun. Outside, rain began falling against the windows. Inside, Ethan stared silently at the medical report in his hands, unaware that the greatest test of his life was waiting just around the corner. Ethan sat alone in his penthouse long after leaving the doctor's office. The city lights stretched endlessly beyond the glass walls, but for the first time in years, he barely noticed them. The medical report lay on the table in front of him. A serious heart condition, surgery recommended. No guarantees, no certainty, no timeline. For a man who had built his entire life around control, the diagnosis felt unbearable. Yet what frightened him most wasn't the possibility of dying. It was the possibility of hurting Sophie. The next few days became a battle between honesty and fear. Every time he looked at her, he wanted to tell her the truth. Every time he opened his mouth, he stopped himself. He convinced himself he was protecting her. But deep down, he knew he was protecting himself from seeing disappointment in her eyes. Then Sophie noticed something was wrong. Of course she did. She always noticed. One afternoon, they met at the community center. Normally, Ethan would greet everyone, ask about ongoing projects, and spend time with the children. Today, he seemed distant, quiet, lost. When they finally sat together, Sophie gently touched his hand. Ethan. He looked up. What's happening? Nothing. She smiled sadly. You're a terrible liar. For several seconds, neither spoke. Then Ethan looked away. I don't want you to worry. Her heart immediately tightened. Tell me. The concern in her voice shattered the last wall he had left. Slowly, he handed her the medical report. Sophie read every page, then read them again. Her hands trembled, not because she was afraid of the diagnosis, but because he had carried the burden alone. When she finally looked up, tears filled her eyes. You should have told me. I didn't want to burden you. A tear rolled down her cheek. You don't get to decide that for me. Ethan's heart broke. Not because she was angry, because she was hurting. And he was the reason. For a moment, neither moved. Then Sophie stood, walked around the table, and wrapped her arms around him, holding him tighter than she ever had before. I'm not going anywhere, she whispered. The words hit harder than any business victory Ethan had ever experienced. For decades, he had relied only on himself. Now someone was choosing to stay. Not because she needed him, because she loved him. Weeks later, the surgery date arrived. The hospital felt colder than usual. Family members of patients filled waiting rooms. Doctors hurried through hallways. Machines beeped constantly. Yet Ethan noticed only one thing: Sophie. She never left his side. Not during consultations, not during tests, not during the sleepless nights leading up to the operation, the morning of the surgery. The morning of the surgery, Ethan lay in a hospital bed while nurses prepared him. Sophie sat beside him, holding his hand. Neither wanted to discuss the risks. They both already knew them. Instead, they talked about dreams. Future dreams, places they wanted to visit, projects they wanted to build together, families they wanted to help, lives they wanted to change. Eventually, a nurse arrived. "It is time." The room suddenly became very quiet. Ethan looked at Sophie. For a moment, the fearless CEO disappeared. All that remained was a man deeply in love. "If anything happens," Sophie's eyes immediately filled with tears. "No, Sophie, no." She squeezed his hand harder. "You're coming back to me." The certainty in her voice made him smile. Then, before nurses wheeled him away, Sophie leaned forward and kissed him. Not quickly, not nervously, but with all the love she carried in her heart. When she pulled away, Ethan felt stronger than he had in weeks. For the first time since the diagnosis, fear loosened its grip. As the doors closed behind him, Sophie remained standing in the hallway, watching, praying, hoping. Horse passed. Then more hours. The waiting felt endless. She paced. She cried. She stared at every doctor who walked through the doors. Finally, a surgeon appeared. Sophie immediately stood. The doctor's expression revealed nothing. For a terrifying second, her heart stopped. Then he smiled. The surgery was successful. The world seemed to exhale. Tears streamed down Sophie's face, not tears of sadness, relief, gratitude, joy. The kind of joy that arrives only after genuine fear. When Ethan finally woke up later that evening, Sophie was sitting beside his bed, exactly where she had promised she would be. His eyes slowly opened. The first face he saw was hers, and the first thing he heard was her voice. "I told you you'd come back." Weak but smiling, Ethan reached for her hand. At that moment, neither wealth nor success mattered. Neither fame nor power mattered. Only this: two people, one promise, and a love that had survived its first great storm. But neither Ethan nor Sophie realized that an even bigger surprise was waiting for them just beyond the hospital walls. A surprise that would change not only their future, but thousands of lives forever. 3 months after Ethan's successful surgery, life felt brighter than it ever had before. His recovery exceeded every expectation. Doctors were pleased. His employees were relieved. Investors celebrated his return. But the person happiest of all was Sophie. She had spent countless hours helping him regain his strength. Morning walks became longer. Laughter became more frequent. And every day together felt like a gift neither took for granted. For the first time in decades, Ethan wasn't focused on building a larger company. He was focused on building a meaningful life. One afternoon, while reviewing financial reports, he came across a file that caught his attention. It contained statistics about homelessness, food insecurity, and struggling families across several states. The numbers were heartbreaking. Millions of people needed help. Millions. That evening, Ethan couldn't stop thinking about it. Later, while having dinner with Sophie, he shared his concerns. "What if we're thinking too small?" Sophie looked curious. "What do you mean?" "We've helped hundreds of families through the community center." She nodded. "And that's amazing. But what if we could help thousands?" The idea hung in the air. Both of them knew what he was suggesting: a larger mission, a bigger dream, one that would require enormous commitment. Most people would have dismissed it as impossible. Not Sophie. Her eyes immediately lit up. "Then let's do it." That simple answer changed everything. Over the following months, Ethan and Sophie created a foundation unlike anything either had imagined. They partnered with schools, shelters, healthcare organizations, community groups. The goal wasn't just temporary assistance. It was long-term transformation, helping people rebuild their lives, providing opportunities, restoring dignity. Soon, stories of the foundation's work spread across the country. Families found housing. Students received scholarships. Seniors gained access to care. Single parents found support. Thousands of lives began changing. Yet despite the growing recognition, Sophie remained exactly the same. Kind, humble, compassionate. She still spent time talking to every child at the community center, still remembered people's birthdays, still carried snacks in her bag for anyone who looked hungry. The success never changed her. And that was one of the countless reasons Ethan loved her. Then came the evening that surprised everyone, including Sophie. The foundation had organized a celebration for volunteers and donors. Hundreds attended. Music filled the ballroom. Laughter echoed throughout the hall. As the event neared its end, Ethan stepped onto the stage. The room immediately quieted. Most guests expected a speech, perhaps a thank you message. Instead, Ethan looked directly at Sophie. She sat near the front, completely unaware of what was about to happen. His voice softened. Years ago, I believed success was measured by numbers. The audience listened. Revenue, growth, achievements. He smiled. I was wrong. Sophie's heart began racing. Success is measured by lives touched. The room remained silent, by kindness shared. Several guests exchanged curious glances. By the people who teach us how to become better versions of ourselves. Now Sophie's eyes filled with tears, because she knew he was talking about her. Ethan stepped down from the stage, walked across the room, and stopped directly in front of her. Gasps spread through the audience. Sophie covered her mouth, unable to speak, unable to breathe, unable to think. Slowly, Ethan lowered himself onto one knee. The powerful CEO who once avoided love with all his heart now knelt before the woman who had transformed his life. Sophie Carter. Tears streamed down her face. You showed kindness when nobody was watching. His voice trembled. You taught me that love is strength. More tears followed. You helped me discover purpose beyond success. The room disappeared. The crowd disappeared. For both of them, only this moment existed. Ethan opened a small velvet box. Inside was a simple, elegant ring. Nothing flashy, nothing excessive. Because he knew Sophie valued meaning more than money, his eyes never left hers. I spent 48 years searching for reasons not to love. His smile grew. Then I met you. The audience quietly wiped away tears. So today, I have only one question. He took a deep breath. The same fearless businessman who had faced impossible challenges suddenly looked wonderfully nervous. Sophie, his voice softened. Will you marry me? For one emotional second, Sophie couldn't answer. Not because she was uncertain, because her heart was overflowing. Finally, she nodded, then laughed through happy tears. Then nodded again. Yes. The room erupted into applause. Cheers filled the ballroom. People stood, some cried openly. Others hugged one another. But Ethan heard none of it, because Sophie had already wrapped her arms around him. And in that moment, nothing else mattered. Not the company, not the headlines, not the wealth. Only the woman who had changed his life with a simple act of kindness on a rainy evening. Months later, they married in a beautiful ceremony, surrounded by family, friends, volunteers, and many of the people whose lives had been transformed through their foundation. The homeless man Sophie had helped that rainy night was there too. Healthy, smiling, living in a new apartment. As Sophie walked down the aisle, Ethan remembered the moment he first saw her, kneeling beside a stranger in the rain. Neither of them could have imagined where that act of kindness would lead. Yet somehow, it had led them here, to love, to purpose, to a future filled with hope. And as they stood together, surrounded by the people they had helped, both understood something extraordinary. The greatest investments are never made in companies. They are made in people. And sometimes, a single moment of compassion can change countless lives, including your own. Like, subscribe, and support my channel. I really need your support. If you enjoy my video, please share it and leave your feedback in the comments.